not taken the precaution to be already at their posts, were compelled to fight and force their way. Their carriages were stopped and broken, the wheels wrenched off, the glasses shivered to atoms, the panels beaten in, drivers, footmen, and masters pulled from their seats and rolled in the mud. Lords, commoners, and reverend bishops, with little distinction of person or party, were kicked and pinched and hustled, passed from hand to hand through various stages of ill usage, and sent to their fellow senators at last, with their clothes hanging in ribbons about them, their bagwigs torn off, themselves speechless and breathless, and their persons covered with the powder which had been cuffed and beaten out of their hair. One lord was so long in the hands of the populace that the peers as a body resolved to sally forth and rescue him, and were in the act of doing so, when he happily appeared among them covered with dirt and bruises, and hardly to be recognised by those who knew him best. The noise and uproar were on the increase every moment. The air was filled with execrations, hoots, and howlings. The mob raged and roared like a mad monster as it was, unceasingly, and each new outrage served to swell its fury. Within doors matters were even yet more threatening. Lord George, preceded by a man who carried the immense petition on a porter's knot through the lobby to the door of the House of Commons, where it was received by two officers of the House, who rolled it up to the table ready for presentation, had taken his seat at an early hour before the Speaker went to prayers. His followers pouring in at the same time, the lobby and all the avenues were immediately filled, as we have seen. Thus the members were not only attacked in their passage through the streets, but were set upon within the very walls of Parliament, while the tumult both within and without was so great that those who attempted to speak could scarcely hear their own voices, far less consult upon the course it would be wise to take in such extremity, or animate each other to dignified and firm resistance. So sure as any member, just arrived, with dress disordered and dishevelled hair, came struggling through the crowd in the lobby, it yelled and screamed in triumph, and when the door of the house, partially and cautiously opened by those within for his admission, gave them a momentary glimpse of the interior, they grew more wild and savage, like beasts at the sight of prey, and made a rush against the portal, which strained its locks and bolts in their staples, and shook the very beams. The strangers' gallery, which was immediately above the door of the house, had been ordered to be closed on the first rumour of disturbance, and was empty, save that now and then Lord George took his seat there, for the convenience of coming to the head of the stairs which led to it, and repeating to the people what had passed within. It was on these stairs that Barnaby, Hugh, and Dennis were posted. There were two flights, short, steep, and narrow, running parallel to each other, and leading to two little doors communicating with a low passage which opened on the gallery. Between them was a kind of well, or unglazed skylight, for the admission of light and air into the lobby, which might be some 18 or 20 feet below. Upon one of these little staircases, not that at the head of which Lord George appeared from time to time, but the other, Gashford stood with his elbow on the banister, and his cheek resting on his hand, with his usual crafty aspect. Whenever he varied this attitude in the slightest degree, so much as by the gentlest motion of his arm, the uproar was certain to increase, not merely there, but in the lobby below, from which place no doubt some man, who acted as fugleman to the rest, was constantly looking up and watching him. "Order!" cried Hugh in a voice which made itself heard even above the roar and tumult, as Lord George appeared at the top of the staircase. "News! News from my lord!" The noise continued, notwithstanding his appearance, until Gashford looked round. There was silence immediately, even among the people in the passages without, and on the other staircases, who could neither see nor hear, but to whom, notwithstanding, the signal was conveyed with marvellous rapidity. "Gentlemen," said Lord George, who was very pale and agitated, "we must be firm. They talk of delays, but we must have no delays. They talk of taking your petition into consideration next Tuesday, but we must have it considered now. Present appearances look bad for our success, but we must succeed, and will. We must succeed, and will. echoed the crowd. And so among their shouts and cheers and other cries, he bowed to them and retired, and presently came back again. There was another gesture from Gashford, and a dead silence directly. 'I am afraid,' he said this time, 'that we have little reason, gentlemen, to hope for any redress from the proceedings of Parliament. But we must redress our own grievances. We must meet again. We must put our trust in Providence, and it will bless our endeavours.' This speech, being a little more temperate than the last, was not so favourably received. When the noise and exasperation were at their height, he came back once more, and told them that the alarm had gone forth for many miles round; that when the king heard of their assembling together in that great body, he had no doubt his majesty would send down private orders to have their wishes complied with; and, with the manner of his speech as childish, irresolute, and uncertain as his matter, was proceeding in this strain, when two gentlemen suddenly appeared at the door where he stood, and pressing past him, and coming a step or two lower down upon the stairs, confronted the people. The boldness of this action quite took them by surprise. They were not the less disconcerted when one of the gentlemen, turning to Lord George, spoke thus, in a loud voice, that they might hear him well, but quite coolly and collectedly. 'You may tell these people, if you please, my lord, that I am General Conway, of whom they have heard, and that I oppose this petition and all their proceedings, and yours. I am a soldier, you may tell them, and I will protect the freedom of this place with my sword. You see, my lord, that the members of this house are all in arms to-day. You know that the entrance to it is a narrow one. You cannot be ignorant that there are men within these walls who are determined to defend that pass to the last, and before whom many lives must fall if your adherents persevere. Have a care what you do.' 'And my Lord George,' said the other gentleman, addressing him in like manner, 'I desire them to hear this from me, Colonel Gordon, your near relation. If a man among this crowd, whose uproar strikes us deaf, crosses the threshold of the House of Commons, I swear to run my sword that moment, not into his, but into your body.' With that, they stepped back again, keeping their faces towards the crowd, took each an arm of the misguided nobleman, drew him into the passage, and shut the door, which they directly locked and fastened on the inside. This was so quickly done, and the demeanour of both gentlemen, who were not young men either, was so gallant and resolute, that the crowd faltered and stared at each other with irresolute and timid looks. Many tried to turn towards the door. Some of the faintest hearted cried they had best go back, and called to those behind to give way, and the panic and confusion were increasing rapidly, when Gashford whispered Hugh. 'What now?' Hugh roared aloud, turning towards them. 'Why go back? Where can you do better than here, boys? One good rush against these doors, and one below at the same time, will do the business. Rush on, then. As to the door below, let those stand back who are afraid. Let those who are not afraid try who shall be the first to pass it. Here goes. Look out down there.' Without the delay of an instant, he threw himself headlong over the banisters into the lobby below. He had hardly touched the ground when Barnaby was at his side. The chaplain's assistant, and some members who were imploring the people to retire, immediately withdrew; and then, with a great shout, both crowds threw themselves against the doors pell-mell, and besieged the house in earnest. At that moment, when a second onset must have brought them into collision with those who stood on the defences within, in which case great loss of life and bloodshed would inevitably have ensued, the hindmost portion of the crowd gave way, and the rumour spread from mouth to mouth that a messenger had been dispatched by water for the military, who were forming in the street. Fearful of sustaining a charge in the narrow passages in which they were so closely wedged together, the throng poured out as impetuously as they had flocked in. As the whole stream turned at once, Barnaby and Hugh went with it; and so, fighting and struggling and trampling on fallen men, and being trampled on in turn themselves, they and the whole mass floated by degrees into the open street, where a large detachment of the guards, both horse and